We have to move on to Mr. Blaikie for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My question for you, you talk about putting the table items from A to 11 into the Appropriations Act. Will you include the amounts as well that are in the table? Because for as much as you say that you're bound to spend only on what's in the table, it's not clear to me where the authority comes from for that. So if it's not in the wording of the bill, where is the legal constraint? And if it's in the wording of even what's in the main estimates, where it says the vote is for new measures approved and identified in Table A211 of Budget 2018, that doesn't commit the government to the numbers in the table.
Again, the annex item or the annex in the main estimates refer to the table, and the table provides granularly the amounts. And we will go further and take the items as listed line by line and put them
with the amounts
in the supply
with the amounts.
Oh, Brian, they will have the amounts.
There's
no
yes
reason
no.
we wouldn't.
Yeah.
They will have the amounts. I wouldn't put them in without the amounts, Mr. Blaikie. But we will do that, and you will appreciate.
Now, are you going to take the items
from
the budget table, or are you going to take it from the annex and the main estimates? Because there are actually some discrepancies between the annex and the main estimates that's supposed to mirror what's in the budget and the budget table itself. So, for instance, under the Department of Industry, there are 2 programs that appear in the main estimates table that don't appear under that same department in the budget table. The regional. There's a suggested allocation for regional development agencies, and there's a suggested allocation for a new women entrepreneurship strategy under that department that wasn't reflected in the budget. So which is it? Are you going to use the numbers from the appendix in the main estimates?
The annex
from the budget.
The annex items are more detailed, and we would provide that level of detail.
Right. So why do we continue to talk about the table in the budget?
Well,
when we're actually talking about the information that's in the main estimates.
You're asking a very good question, Mr. Blaikie.
And they're not exactly the same.
The reality is that the information on that we've laid out both in the main estimates and in which is more detailed, and the line-by-line items in Table A211 in the budget, should clear up any questions.
Now, in terms of the wording,
putting in the supply bill,
in terms of the wording for the supply bill, is that something we're going to get when this comes to committee of the whole, or are you committed to working with opposition parties in advance of that to ensure that we find the wording satisfactory as well?
Well, if we put the level of detail from the annex in the supply bill, I can't imagine there being dissatisfaction with that level.
Well, it's going to be in the wording. I mean, you didn't imagine there'd be dissatisfaction with the original wording of the appropriation bill,
I still find it hard
to
believe, to be honest.
So what I'm wanting to know is, are you going to be speaking to us prior to tabling the bill so that we can let you know whether or not we find the wording satisfactory before Parliament is put on the spot?
We will take that under advisement.
So it's neither yes or a no.
Well,
right?
I keep
what
saying yes.
What I'd like to know, because you're the principal spokesperson for Treasury Board, obviously, is whether you think that the costing process at Treasury Board provides a level of rigor and detail that the budget costing process does not.
I believe that the working relationship between finance and Treasury Board.
Do you think that process adds rigor and detail to a significant degree? Over what's presented in the budget?
I believe that the budgeting process and the Treasury Board submission process work together very well in the Treasury Board.
Well, but they don't. Actually, the reason for the central vote is that those two processes don't work well together. And we've heard clearly from the parliamentary budget officer that if Treasury Board and the Department of Finance worked better together, we wouldn't need a catch-all central vote for all the new budget
last time I checked,
items.
PBO doesn't work at Treasury Board.
Well, no, but you don't have to work at Treasury Board to see that there's a lack of cooperation, because if you had that cooperation, then you wouldn't need to have a catch-all central vote.
Actually, I can tell you there's a very strong level of cooperation between Treasury Board and Finance.
Well, clearly not what's required in order to have budget items in the main estimates, as they do in Australia, which is your preferred example.
Which is actually, and look, this is the first time in a long time that we've actually done this type of alignment between the main estimates and the budget in terms of the sequence. And in the first year, we've had really significant success, and you would acknowledge that this is a significant step forward. You've told me that.
My question to you.
But beyond that, in the first year, we've achieved this success. As time goes on, this is going to bake in an even stronger working relationship between Treasury Board, Finance, and departments.
My question
as
to
we
you
move
is
forward
that
in terms of strengthening the budget,
if folks aren't just
and Treasury Board process.
If people aren't just wasting their time at Treasury Board, if the costing process actually adds value, and the PBO has suggested that it does, because when they tracked the budget items from 2016, they said somewhere in the neighborhood of 31% of the items, either there was significantly more spent or less spent than what was foreseen in budget spending. The question is, if there's valuable work being done at Treasury Board, why should parliamentarians not benefit from that work prior to approving funding, which is the norm and has been the norm? But what the central vote does is actually authorizes a lot of money, almost $7 billion worth of money, because only $221 million of this vote is actually allocated so far. Those are the only things that have been through Treasury Board. So why should parliamentarians not benefit from the more rigorous costing prior to approving authority for program spending?
Well, first of all, we cannot exceed any of these amounts without going
But
back
we can't ask
to
questions
Parliament.
about programs that haven't been costed adequately. So if Treasury Board plays a real role in providing decent costing.
I would disagree with what you're saying, because Treasury Board and Finance work together, even in the budgeting process. They work with
Well then why weren't these?
and
Why
this
didn't
has
these
been-
items?
so there
if
has
that
been
relationship
rigor.
exists, why did these items not go through the Treasury Board approval process prior to the main estimates and then get included in the regular departmental estimates?
Daniel, you cited the Australian model. Now, the Australian model, where main estimates and the budget come out simultaneously, and that work, that is a gold standard. And that is something that I've said to you, I've said at this committee, is something that we will attain.
But what
over
you're
time.
asking
But
now
what
is
we've
that in
done-
the
what we've
interim,
done here-
Parliament
Gentlemen, I'm
sacrifices power
sorry.
of oversight.
What we've
Gentlemen,
done here,
we
and I
want to
think
give
you-
adequate time for everyone here to hear questions and answers. And having said that, I'd like to move on now to Mr. Peter. Minister, I know you had guaranteed your appearance here for 1 hour. We're just a few minutes over that, but to complete our complete round, we have Mr. Blaikie for 3 minutes. If you would agree to stay here, since I know you enjoyed the first exchange so much, for an additional 3 minutes, while Mr. Blaikie has a couple of questions.
Just hope he gives me a chance to get a word in. Mr. Poilievre didn't. But anyway, Mr. Blaikie. Mr. Blaikie.
Sir, you mentioned in your remarks that you're hoping that this is a process where we can all work well together on, because there is obviously work to do in terms of improving the process. And I would say that we've been negotiating about the estimates in various ways and talking about them for the life of the entire Parliament. And I do think we made some good progress in terms of good faith work last June when we agreed to a delay in the tabling of the main estimates. But when we were talking about that, we were talking about doing that so that there would be more time between the budget and the main estimates for programs to receive Treasury Board approval and be included in the departmental estimates. At no time, up until a week before you tabled the main estimates this year, was there ever mention of a central vote. And then, beyond that, we've said, okay, well, this is actually quite different than what was conceived in the negotiations that we had. Today is a decent conversation, but there's only 10 non-government parliamentarians sitting around the table. I've asked for a take-note debate on that. That's a request that you have yet to grant. You have not moved for that debate, which would allow actually all parliamentarians to participate in this conversation. I've asked, you've suggested that you're going to take some measures to provide more legal clarity in terms of the authorities granted by parliamentarians under Vote 40 by including the schedule in the appropriation bill. When I asked if you would consult with the opposition parties to make sure that that wording is satisfactory, you said you'd take it under advisement. So we don't have a commitment. You're asking for us to move forward in this process in good faith, and yet when we've made requests for you to have the conversation with Parliament as a whole, when we've asked for you to confer with us before deciding on the language of the bill, the first time you did that, it didn't go well. We weren't satisfied with that wording. The parliamentary budget officer wasn't convinced that the wording was adequate. So now you're taking new measures, and we're asking you to be consultative so that you're not putting Parliament on the spot, and so that we can actually do as you ask, which is to work together in order to have a better process. I think there are still problems with doing all of this on a central vote. It raises the question as to why government wouldn't just have one central vote for all the voted authorities and have a comprehensive table in the budget. I mean, one of the disadvantages of that is that it's not broken down by department then. It all appears in one vote, and the Treasury Board Minister would be responsible for speaking to all of government initiatives that Parliament is voting authority for. We're in effect doing that for all the new initiatives within the budget. So there are problems with the idea of a central vote, even if the language of the appropriations bill is changed. I think it's incumbent upon the government to create the opportunity for a meaningful conversation about that in Parliament. It's why I've asked for a take-note debate. I'm mystified as to why a minister who likes to talk about how open to parliamentary dialogue he is would refuse that request. So I'm going to ask you one more time, particularly in light of the new information you've announced at committee today. Will you commit to having a take-note debate in the House?
You've got about 5 seconds to say yes or no, Mr. Minister.
Break, for goodness sakes. Mr. Chair, let me finish. I just want to, I want to end this on a...
If you can do it fairly quickly, because we are over time.
I will, for sure.
I set it up as a yes-no question,
absolutely.
so you could be really
well, couple
expedient.
Things. Daniel, you've got opposition day motions. You can talk to your House leader, and if they believe that's you use one of your opposition days.
You guys are the government. You decide the business any time of day.
I'm sorry. I am going to stop it now.
Mr. Blaikie's letter to me. Actually, I've got your letter where you requested this the take note debate. You say in it, we in the NDP supported this change in the the sequencing, having estimates that reflect the priorities announced by the government in its budget. But on June 20th, 2017, you voted against. Now, I appreciate your letter saying you supported it, and I guess you gave us some moral support. But moral support's kind of like moral victories. I don't like moral victories. I like actually support if you want to, but
without the consent
I'm
of the
saying
opposition
that
parties.
on you.